Welcome to the California garden in the month of July. The heat of the summer is on and the garden is providing abundant harvests of summer vegetables and fruits. So sit back and enjoy this journey as we take a tour of the garden. We look at what's growing in the July garden, all the harvests we made, some things for you to do in your garden this month, and some awesome gardening products available in your local stores. So let's begin with the tour of the garden. There's a big pumpkin hiding behind this pumpkin plant that you see here, followed by these onions, which are the small bulbing kind of onions, followed by our bitter gourd plant that's growing on this trellis, and it hasn't produced heavily this year, but we'll see how it goes. For the first time in many years, I'm trying to grow cluster beans, and cluster beans is something I've not been very successful at growing, so again we'll see how that goes this season. And now let's move on to the tomato bed. As you can see here, lots and lots of tomatoes, and the missing foliage is because of a spider mite problem I had, and more on that later. Followed by some okra plants. Now we were growing the Nombo giant okra that you see on the right side, and then we have a new batch of okra that I just sowed and planted as well. So that should give me a good supply of okra late in the season, and I just hope it is long enough for the okra plant to produce good pods. On the other side we have some more tomato plants, again loaded with tomatoes. This is the big boy and the San Marzano tomatoes, absolutely loaded. Followed by the bed that has a lot of sweet potatoes, peppers, and some taro root plants. The sweet potato plant has pretty much taken over the bed and is growing like crazy. And this is another batch of okra, and I love growing okra because it's very expensive at the grocery store, and fresh okra tastes just amazing, and we do eat a lot of okra as well. Followed by some pepper plants, as you can see. Now the overwintered eggplants were removed this year because they were not doing that well, and I planted a batch of tomatoes, and this batch of tomatoes will give me enough tomatoes late in the season. And it's a good idea to plant a new batch somewhere around June or July so that you get a steady supply of tomatoes in your garden. This plant that you see here is the Kabocha plant. It's a type of pumpkin, but it's actually a squash. It's an amazing tasting vegetable. It's like a cross between a sweet potato and a pumpkin. It's just amazing to taste, and this is the first time I'm growing it in my garden, and it's been pretty good. So that concludes the tour of our vegetable garden. In our container garden tour, we first have the pineapple plant. In my previous video, someone commented that you need to keep a banana near the pineapple plant, which encourages production of fruit. So we'll see how that goes. This is something I don't identify. I might take this plant out later. If you know which plant it is, let me know in the comments. And this pepper variety is a new pepper variety that I'm trying out. It's called the Pubescens Pepper, which is a very interesting pepper variety. I'll see how that comes up. Now this is our cherry tomato plant, and this had a spider mite problem. And what we did was we removed most of the leaves of this plant and then sprayed it with rosemary oil. And the plant has recovered pretty well. As you can see, it's producing a lot of cherry tomatoes, and it's loaded with tomatoes right now. Moving on to the next container, we have the cucumbers growing. This is the white cucumber, one of my favorite varieties. You can see that large pumpkin on the back of the container from our only pumpkin plant. It's a huge one. This is the Jupiter pepper variety that's growing in the container. It has yielded a lot of peppers, and it continues to grow and produce more peppers. And finally, we have the hyacinth beans. This is a new hyacinth bean variety that I'm trying out. It has a bush type growth, and I'm interested to see how it goes. And on the other side, we have our Meyer lemon plant, some curry leaves that are growing in a container. We have our pineapple plant, which has taken off pretty well, and some strawberry plants that have given us a good strawberry harvest. We have a Malabar spinach plant, and these are the two strawberry plants that are in front. And this is the mulberry tree that's growing pretty well. Hope to get some mulberries next season. And this tomato plant, the San Marzano, had a spider mite problem, and I had to remove that plant, and it's trying to grow back now. The mint plant has grown very large and I probably need to prune it, make sure it stays well. And then we have the chilies. We did harvest a lot of chilies this season. And this is the lemongrass plant. Again, in the summer season, it's grown pretty well. And the curry leaf plant that's growing behind that is doing well. So that concludes the tour of the container garden. I know a lot of you like this container tour, so I'll keep it coming in my monthly gardening series videos. Moving on to what's growing in our garden this month, we have the tropical plants like bananas and moringa that are doing very well in this hot summer season, followed by the kabocha, which I just mentioned. Very good variety of squash to grow. It's actually called the Kabocha Squash, and followed by a new entrant in our garden, which is the Stevia plant. Now the Stevia or the sugar plant has leaves that are extremely sweet, and you can actually just substitute them for sugar. They are that sweet. So you can add them to teas, you can even squeeze the leaves and extract the juice to form a nice sweet liquid, which is an organic and very natural substitute for sugar. So I'm going to be planting this stevia plant in this container. And a lot of you I know have planted stevia plant in your garden. So if you have planted a stevia plant, do let me know in the comments below and let me know how you use it. And once I planted the stevia plant, it had some old leaves and it had some stems that were not doing very well. So the next step was to prune it. So what I did is I just removed all the old leaves and the stem, and by pruning it, the plant should grow a little more bushy compared to what it is right now. And I'm hoping that it grows more leaves so that it can be used. The next plant that we have here is the tomatoes. Now, the summer season is amazing for tomatoes, and I did have a spider mite problem with these tomato plants, and within about 4 or 5 days, all the foliage had turned yellowish white and I had to remove the foliage. Some of the plants recovered quickly, like this cherry tomato that was growing in the container, absolutely loaded with tomatoes as well. So we're already productive, but I did have the spider mite problem. Now let's look at the harvest we made this month. Bell peppers. We were trying out a lot of bell pepper varieties this year, and all of them did very well. These were the ones that were growing in the raised bed. Amazing quality peppers, pretty large in size. We also planted the Jupiter pepper variety. We planted them in both the raised beds as well as the containers, and they did very well too. So all in all, a great year for growing peppers and tomatoes. Here is the Jupiter pepper variety that's growing in this whiskey barrel container. Again, it grew very well. And you can see the peppers here. They're amazing peppers, very delicious as well. So overall, I'm very happy with all the summer vegetables we grew this season, and the harvest was just amazing. Now moving on to the other plants, we harvested a lot of berries, strawberries to start with. These strawberries are growing in these small containers, and they did produce a lot of strawberries. Never had any issues with growing strawberries here in my home garden. We did harvest a lot of them. The strawberries were delicious, and homegrown strawberries are just so fresh and so delicious that you do have to try growing it in your home garden. We also harvested the blackberries. Now, if you remember the blackberry plant, I actually gave that away to a friend, but I did remove one plant from that and then planted it separately, and that's yielding some delicious blackberries as of now. We also harvested a lot of chilies. This is the hot chili variety, the hot Indian chili variety, and when this turns red, it is very hot. It is extremely spicy, it's extremely hot pepper variety, and you can harvest them green if you want less of the heat. But once these turn red, they are extremely hot, and they are very delicious as well. It's got a very nice flavor. And it's a type of cayenne pepper that originates from India, and it's a pretty good variety to grow in your home. It's a very productive pepper variety that's easily growing in this container. I haven't even provided any support to this plant, but it seems to be doing well. and it's yielding a lot of these peppers. And this is how the harvest looks like. The red peppers are hotter, the green peppers are slightly mild, but still very hot. And this was the other pepper variety that we were growing. This was overwintered from last year. And this is another cayenne pepper variety that did very well. So we overwintered it, and even in this season, it's producing a lot of peppers. Once again, these peppers are hotter when they're red, when they ripen and turn into this bright red color. And this year has been very good for all kinds of peppers that have grown in the garden. And now moving on to the curry leaves harvest. So we did grow a lot of curry leaves. We have them in containers, and we were able to harvest a lot of these curry leaves. The eggplants also did very well, and they had the same spider mite problem. These are the overwintered eggplants, and we were able to harvest a lot of eggplants this month too. But eventually we got rid of the eggplants because of the abundance of spider mites. They're just very hard to get rid of. So I will be planting a new batch of eggplants next season. And so far the eggplants have yielded very well and have served me very well for the last 2 years. And now let's move on to the grapes. We had an abundance of grapes growing on our grapevine. This is the flame seedless variety of grape that I've covered in my previous video, and it's been growing very well. We were able to harvest a lot of grapes throughout the month, end of June, all of July, and there are still plenty of grapes on the grapevine. And they start off as green, they turn yellow and eventually red. So you can just pick some of the red grapes to start with. So you can just pick those that are red, and these are the sweetest grapes. And if you see any bunches that are mostly red, like this one here, you can harvest the entire bunch as you see here. And the ones that are dark green are a little bit tangy to taste, but the ones that are yellow, bright yellow and red are the ones that are most delicious and sweet. Here you can see that towards the end of July, the grapes have turned mostly red, and at this stage the grapes are the sweetest. The ones that we are harvesting here are just amazing to taste. Now it's best not to grow cool season crops during the summer, and this kale plant that we had produced abundantly. We harvested a lot of kale, and now what we are doing is harvesting the kale. But while harvesting, I saw that this kale plant had a white fly problem. I could just get rid of the white flies and still use the kale for some time, but I also needed to harvest it and use the container to plant some other plants. So we did harvest most of this kale so that we could first of all use a lot of kale and then also use the container to plant some summer vegetables. And that's why you should plant crops that are adequate or appropriate for the season. That way you grow the best plants in your garden. Now, the okra that we were growing, this is a Nombo giant variety of okra which we grew from seeds from last year, and they did extremely well. We harvested about 2 or 3 pods every day from this okra patch, and there were about 5 or 6 plants that were growing in this patch. And the Nombo giant variety of okra is a large okra variety, so you need to make sure that you harvest it when it's tender, otherwise it's going to be a little stringy and not so good to taste. So what you're seeing here is pretty much the ideal time you should harvest your okra. And as you can see here, the plant has a lot of okras. Even after harvesting almost every day, we were able to get a lot of okra from these plants. And that's why I started a new batch so that we have adequate okra for the rest of the season. And here you can see our harvest, and you can clearly see that this is the okra that was harvested a little late. You can see it turned slightly yellow, and when you eat this kind of okra, it's going to feel a little stringy and not so good to taste. So with okras, it's very important that you harvest them soon, like this okra that you see here. There are 2 okras here that were harvested a little late, and the rest of them were harvested in time. So these are the 2 that were a little larger than we expected. And onions. We're going to spend a lot of time discussing onions in today's video. So the onions that we were growing were in raised beds as well as in containers, as you see here. The ones that we were growing in a whiskey barrel container, this is the Utah Jumbo yellow variety of onions. We had to break the necks of these onion plants so that they go into building the bulbs, as you can see here. Some onion plants will automatically bend over and fall down, but if they don't, you can just bend them at their tops, which is called breaking their necks, so that the plant thinks that it's the end of the season and it's going to start producing very large bulbs from that time onwards. So after you break the necks and let them be for about a week or 10 days, you can then pull them out and then leave them wherever they are. You can leave them on the raised beds or in the container where they were growing. And what this does is it gets rid of the excess moisture that the onions have. And you need to make sure that you stop watering your onions now. Once you turn them over and leave them on your beds or containers, the curing process starts. Now, there are two things that are happening. The bulbs are growing larger and the onion is growing like a thick coat around it to protect itself from the elements. So what you do is just remove the part that has the dirt, some of the outside part that has the dirt, some of the peels, and then remove the roots. And this is one way to clean your onions just with your hands. Just remove the excess dirt and prepare them for braiding, which is what I'll be trying for the first time this year. So you can leave them to dry in the sun if they're extremely moist, like the container plants, or like these raised bed onions that you see here. Just make sure you clean them, and we're going to start braiding them now. So all I've done is I've attached a mason line, something you can easily find at any hardware store, Walmart, or any other place, or Amazon. I'll provide a link to that in the video description. And you just start tying the onions on the top. Now, mason line is strong enough to hold quite a lot of pounds. It's quite strong actually. But I'm still gonna put about a few onions and then move on to the next batch or the next braid. And as you can see here, this is going to dry in the sun for about a week or so. Now, if you have onions that are very moist, like the ones that you see here, they've not been fully cured, what I would recommend is you trim the leaves and then remove the roots, remove all the dirty peels from the bottom, and then you can dry them in the sun for about a week or so. What that does is it gives the onion a little bit of a better outside peel, which will help you preserve the onions for a longer time. Now, once you've completed this process, the next step is to leave them out in a nice sunny location for about a week or so. And you'll see that within about a week, they've developed this nice brown skin on the outside. And then you can do the same thing. You can just braid them and then hang them outside for about 5 to 7 days. And once they have been fully cured, you can then move them to your garage or a shaded place where you can hang them till you use them. And now let's move on to harvesting the kabocha. That's actually not a pumpkin. It looks like a pumpkin and tastes like a pumpkin, but it's more of a squash. And the right time to harvest the kabocha is to wait till it turns completely orange. But I'm going to show you how the kabocha looks like even if you harvest it when it's partially orange. So if you're going to be harvesting this kabocha, this has some stripes on it, but it's not fully ripe. And I'll tell you how do you check your pumpkin so that it's ripe. Now, we did need a pumpkin, a squash for our cooking. So we did harvest this one and it wasn't bad. It still turned orange when we kept it outside for a few days. But you can see here, beautiful looking squash, and this is how it looks like once it's turned a little orange. And let's see how it looks like from the inside. Now, this is one of the best tasting pumpkins or squashes that I've had. It's like a cross between a sweet potato and a pumpkin. Very delicious. It's one of the sweetest pumpkins or squashes you can grow in your garden. It has a nice orange color, lots of seeds, which I'm going to be saving for the next season. And this plant actually came from the compost. So I might have purchased a kabocha sometime, threw it in the compost, and one of the seeds was still viable and it came out as a plant. In North America, this is called the Kabocha Squash, and not really a pumpkin, although it looks like one. Now, here is one that is actually ready for harvest, and you can see here it's turned completely orange on the outside. And to test whether your pumpkin or squash is ready for harvest or not, you just try to drive your nail on the outer part of the pumpkin, and if it goes right in, that means your pumpkin is not ready yet. But if it resists your nail and you're not able to really get your nail inside the pumpkin or the squash, then it's ready for harvest. So that's how you decide if your pumpkin or squash is ready for harvest or not. And once it turns this color, it's ripe and it's extremely delicious. Here's the nail test. And now we move on to the king of the summer vegetables, that's tomatoes. When we came back from our vacation last month, the tomatoes were somewhat ripe, but we harvested a lot of tomatoes after that. And in July, you can see here, this plant is the big boy tomato. Again, produced a lot of tomatoes on this small plant. But the plant actually died in July, and we were still able to harvest a lot of tomatoes from this plant, as you can see here. But because of the lack of foliage, you can see that some of these tomatoes have sun scald on them. The sun just burns the tomatoes. So not that good for some tomatoes. But overall, I was pretty happy because we did get a lot of tomatoes from this plant, and they were pretty big sized tomatoes. In fact, we now have so many tomatoes at home that I have to give it out to friends and neighbors, and they're all very happy. And the cherry tomatoes were the ones that grew the best. You can see a little bit of spider mite damage on this cherry tomato plant as well. And after the spider mite treatment, which I will cover probably in another video, I was able to harvest a lot of tomatoes, and the plant grew back as well. This is the big boy tomato. Again, a lot of large size tomatoes produced by this plant. Not very sweet, perfect for cooking, and very juicy as well. So you can slice it, you can use it in sandwiches, you can use it for cooking. So a lot of uses for this big boy tomato plant. And unlike the cherry plant, which is sweet, this is not sweet. And we have some San Marzano tomatoes as well that we harvested. So here is what our harvest looks like. We harvested these tomatoes like almost every day, and our plants gave us a abundant harvest of tomatoes. So a great year to grow tomatoes here in Southern California. Now let's look at the things to do in your garden this month. You can start a new batch of okra. Best done in June or July because you need some time for the plants to grow. But the seeds germinated very quickly, and due to the temperatures outside, they were also growing very fast. And you can also start some more gourds. You still have about 3 or 4 months of warm weather left, so they should do well. And we also started some cucumber plants. This is the white cucumber variety. It's a very nice cucumber variety, very delicious as well. It's a good idea to plant a second round of tomatoes in July or even June if you can. I was not here in June. This is the Cherokee Carbon variety, which is a cross between the Cherokee Purple and Beefsteak. This is the Celebrity tomato variety, which is a determinate tomato variety that produces very good tomatoes. And the benefit of planting another round of tomatoes is that you get tomatoes late in the season. Here in Southern California, it does stay warm for quite a few months beyond the summer season. So take advantage of that. And the final variety of tomato that we are planting here is called the German Queen, which I've heard is a very good tomato variety. I haven't planted this tomato variety yet, but I'm going to try it this season. I'm using some all-purpose organic fertilizer when I'm planting, and then I'll be adding some tomato fertilizer as the plant grows larger. And this technique has always worked out for me very well. When the plants are small, you use a high nitrogen fertilizer like the one you see here. Plant your tomatoes deep. Make sure that the plant is as deep as possible so that it grows roots around the tomato plant where the stem meets the soil. And this is something which is very unique about the tomato plant, that the deeper you plant it, the better the plant grows. It's going to form roots all around, and that's something which is unique to tomatoes. Doesn't really work for other plants. Now in the planting hole, what you need to do is put the organic fertilizer around the base of the planting hole. I just eyeball it, and then I always remove my plant from the peat pot. Although they recommend that you can plant your peat pot directly, I really don't like planting it with the plastic pot and the peat pot. I just plant the plant directly in the soil, and then I remove the peat pot and throw it. This organic fertilizer will suffice for at least about a month, after which I will be adding some tomato fertilizer that will have some more things that the tomato plant needs to grow. So pretty much an easy technique. We just dig a planting hole just like that and then plant a tomato plant. Now, one of the recommendations from one of our YouTube viewers was to interplant basil along with tomatoes. Now, my wife was actually asking me to plant some basil in the home garden anyways. So we got some Thai basil plants and we're planning to interplant this with our tomato plants, and we'll see how that goes. Now, the rationale behind that is that the basil actually improves the flavor of the tomatoes. So whether that works or not, I'm not really sure, but I'm doing this as a part of a recommendation by one of our YouTube viewers. So I'm going to try it out and see how that goes. But the basil should at least keep some critters away, and hopefully it should be nice for the tomato bed. So you can see here I've interplanted the basil plants like you see here in between the tomato plants, and not only will I get a good supply of basil, the tomatoes will shade the basil plants as they grow. Now they need a thorough watering and then they're all set to grow. If you live around a beach, seaweed is one of the best free things you can get for your garden. Now my son was at a summer camp and he got this surprise for me. He just packed some seaweed and got it in a bag, and I was pleasantly surprised. What we did is we washed the seaweed very nicely in water and then chopped it up into fine pieces and then added them to the compost bin. Now you can add this directly to the soil, to your raised beds, to your containers, but I just thought I'll put it in the compost bin so that it's composted well and we can use it later as we need it. And now let's look at the garden products that you can buy locally, online, or wherever you want to. So let's start with the seed starting mix. I saw these burpee seed starting mix in our local Home Depot, and they were just about $2.88. Now I thought I'll try them out and see how they are as a seed starting mix. And this brick is similar to the other cocoa bricks. You just add some water and then it expands. Now what I do is I just take the coconut core that's ready and put them in a Ziploc bag. This is a gallon Ziploc bag, and I was able to create 2 bags, which is a lot of seed starting mix for what you need. So for the price, it's good. I wouldn't say it's very economical, but coconut core is one of the best seed starting mixes I've used. It's better than any other mix that I've used so far, and usually it's very expensive, that's why I don't buy it, but at this price I think it's a good deal. But if you want more mix, then you should definitely buy a bigger sized bag. And this is how it looks like once the seeds germinate in the coconut core. And now let's look at some plants that are available. This is at Home Depot, and there are tropical plants like the pineapple plant which you can grow indoors. I'm not really sure if this is an edible pineapple. It could be, but it looked very small and the plant looked like an indoor plant. We also had some coconuts that were growing. Very pretty coconut plants, and they make really good indoor plants, and they can be kept indoors and grown in bright light. The next product we saw was from Black Magic at Home Depot, and they had a lot of products and they were very interesting. They had this coconut coir mix in large bags. They also had some nutrient solutions. This is the base solution, which is pretty much an all-purpose solution. And although the price looks expensive, remember that liquid nutrients are actually pretty economical because you have to use very less of these nutrients. And this is the bloom booster mix with just a different NPK ratio. And this is another one right here. And since you have to use very less, you can still buy it and it won't break your bank. So overall, very good products from Black Magic, and it was very interesting to see a company come out with these products. So there we have it, folks. That was our episode on the California garden in the month of July. Let me know what you are doing in your garden this month. Is it too hot in your garden? Is it raining? Or are you just enjoying the weather in your garden and having a good time? Do let me know your thoughts. Put in a comment below. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video, and we'll see you again soon. Happy gardening.